Good morning, Miss Janita. Hi, my name is Nicole, and these are my group members, Ian, Amanda, Fung Jeung, and Kiret. Today, we are going to talk about the macroeconomic issues that are discussed based on the article that we chose, which is the economic issues preoccupied Malaysians and ways to overcome them. I'll be giving a brief introduction about the articles, whereas my group member Kiret will be explaining the economic data. Amanda will list down the impact of the macroeconomic problem. Fung Jeung will clarify the measures that can be taken to overcome the problems. And lastly, Ian will conclude the whole presentation. The article that we chose was written based on the few major macroeconomic problems that occurred in Malaysia at the beginning of 2017. Inflation occurred due to the removal of cooking oil subsidy by the government. It was the first time in 10 years that the price of cooking oil in Malaysia rose. For example, the price of 1 kilogram polybag of cooking oil increased from 2.5 ringgit to 2.9 ringgit. As for the 5 kilogram bottle, the price rose from 13 ringgit 35 cents to 15 ringgit 25 cents, causing the whole nation to suffer from the high prices. Besides that, rainy season, which usually only occurs during November and December, had prolonged till the New Year's, causing plantation production to drop by 20%. This issue caused the cost of vegetable rose up between 20 to 30% as the fertilizers for plantation were imported from abroad. The article also discussed the following issues, which are the increases in prices, depreciation of the ringgit, and the large capital outflow in Malaysia at the beginning of 2017. Firstly, let us discuss about the depreciation of ringgit. According to the BMI research, the Malaysian ringgit was one of the weakest major currency in Asia. The fall of ringgit had also affected the markets abroad, as Malaysia is one of the countries that mainly rely on importation of goods and services. This fall in value of the ringgit caused the prices of imports to increase in Malaysia. Many local businesses were suffering from the lack of business because the demand for imports decreased and the prices of production input increased. Moreover, parents had to fork out more ringgits for their children's education in the overseas due to the devaluation of Malaysia's currency. The depreciation of ringgit brought an increase to the cost of living in Malaysia. On the other hand, however, the depreciation of ringgit had helped business firms which export products and raw materials abroad to receive more profit and become more competitive as they sold their products at a lower price in foreign currency. Other than that, local tourism and hotel business increased in business as it was more affordable to visit Malaysia. On to the next issue, which is the outflow of capital in Malaysia. Due to the increase in US interest rate and the decline of the ringgit, a large capital outflow from Malaysia happened in just a short period of time. As stated by the Star, foreigners had withdrew RM 4.2 billion of equities and RM 19.9 billion of government securities. There are a few strategies on helping the capital outflow in Malaysia that were stated in the article. The government can collect 75% of the exporters' export, which originate from the foreign currency to ringgit Malaysia, along with companies and funds could be discouraged to invest abroad. Now, I'll pass to Kiret to explain the economic data.
Hey guys, I'm Harkir here, and today I'll be talking about the graphs of the economic data relating to the economic problem. In the year 2017, the prices on goods and services were rising, as well as the imports, as there were too much outflow of capital. Okay, so as we get into rising prices means inflation exists. As we can see from the graphs, it means inflation rate. Okay. The graph actually shows many years of inflation rate in the past from 2016 to 2018, okay, but then we'll concentrate more on 2017. As you can see, from the midst of 2016, the inflation rate had actually been increasing at a really slow rate, but then in 2017, the inflation rate has risen drastically from about 2% to about 5%. Okay, due to many reasons, but in this case, the most known factor was the removal of the cooking oil subsidy, which made the price of cooking oil to be more expensive. Also, the rainy season due to climate change had actually caused crops to wilt and plant businesses to struggle to supply fruits and vegetables as it cost more to maintain agricultural livestock. This actually caused the multiplier effect where the prices of food began to rise, causing the standard of living to decrease. People had to spend more money for the same amount of food. This then caused sales for businesses to fall, and people could no longer afford certain items, especially luxurious items such as leather goods, which are mainly wants instead of needs. Okay, so this caused sales to fall, and the businesses may have been forced to leave employees redundant to compensate for loss of sales as they needed to reduce costs. Okay, now let's move on to the second economic problem, which is the rising prices in imports. Okay, as you can see, both the graphs they actually shows the exchange rate between the American dollar and the Malaysian ringgit. As 2016 was coming to an end, the Malaysian ringgit had been falling, but the American dollar had been getting stronger and stronger until 2017. As 2017 onwards, the ringgit gradually became stronger, which meant that the graph was dipping down. In 2016, the lowest the exchange rate was around 3.85, where 1 American dollar was actually equivalent to 3 ringgit 85 cents. This was where the ringgit was actually strongest between 2016 and 2017. The highest was at 4.49 on the 3rd of January, which showed that 1 American dollar is actually equivalent to 4 ringgit 49 cents. This caused prices of imported goods to rise as the Malaysian ringgit was weaker compared to the American dollar. This was also a factor of inflation, especially on imported products, as more ringgit had to be spent on the same amount of goods. As the exchange rate began to fall, the Malaysian ringgit had slowly begun to rise, which meant that people investing in foreign markets may gain. Some people may also gain from the fall of ringgit. Businesses that export product overseas may hope for the ringgit to fall, as their goods and services may be bought using foreign currency, which is worth more than before. Some may even take advantage of the foreign exchange and buy products in the US and sell them in Malaysia, where profits can be made due to the exchange rate. This is actually known as the arbitrage. Okay, now moving on to the third economic problem, which is actually too much outflow of capital. Okay, as we can see, this graph represents the Malaysian capital flows from 2015 to 2018. At the end of 2016, the capital flows in Malaysia fell, which meant that the residents were purchasing more foreign assets than foreigners purchasing domestic assets. The movement of money was mainly used for investment purposes, moving in and out of Malaysia. In 2017, the net capital flow was negative. This soon began to increase all the way till the midst of 2017, where it declined again. As the capital flows remained positive, it meant that more money was flowing into the country rather than out. This would have been caused by the fact that Malaysia had fallen, and as a result, it attracted foreign countries to invest in Malaysia, which then caused more money to come into Malaysia, strengthening the Malaysian ringgit. That's all for my part. Now, moving on to Amanda, which will explain about the impact of the macroeconomic problem on the economy. Thank you.
Okay, hi guys, my name is Amanda, and now I'll be explaining about the impact that the three macroeconomic problems had on the economy. So the first problem that occurred was inflation and the rise in prices of imports. Malaysia has always been highly reliant on imports, especially for daily necessities such as canned foods, machinery, petroleum, and agricultural products. So the rise in prices of imports eventually led to decrease in demands by local consumers. These imports became unaffordable for many people and may seem to come as a disadvantage for the country. However, consumers will eventually resort to cheaper alternatives when purchasing goods. As domestic goods and services don't go through any import taxes and such, they are cheaper and much more affordable than imported goods. The rise in prices of imports can lead to an increase in demand for local produce products and act as an opportunity for local firms to grow and expand their business, especially for those in the agricultural industry. So the next problem I will be talking about is the decline of the ringgit. The depreciation of the ringgit was one of the contributing factors to the rise in the price of imports. So from the end of 2016 to the beginning of 2017, it was reported that the exchange rate between the US dollar and Malaysian ringgit rose to a 4.5 per USD. Now to the impacts. There are both negative and positive impacts to this economic problem. The negative impacts include the rising in prices of imports, which was explained before this, decrease in business for local retailers as products are less affordable for consumers, increased costs in construction and prices of houses as materials have to be imported from overseas, high tuition fees for students abroad as more ringgit is needed to pay for foreign currencies, and the need for more ringgits to repay for foreign loans. So these factors could eventually lead to a recession as consumers' purchasing power for demands for goods are decreased. Now on to the positive impacts on the economy. Small firms that are exporting goods such as petroleum and palm oil can come to an advantage as they will receive more revenue in ringgit terms and also become more competitive with those abroad. The tourism sector in Malaysia will also thrive as everything is much cheaper in the country compared to overseas, which attracts foreign visitors. Now, although the positive impacts may seem to outweigh the negative effects, the depreciation of the ringgit may lead to higher living costs, especially for those in the lower and middle class. Now on to the last economic problem. It's the large capital outflow of the country. The large capital outflows followed after depreciation of the ringgit. As US interest rates rose, more capital was withdrawn by foreigners who invested in the country. So eventually, economists in Malaysia were worried as foreigners were largely involved in the country's stock market and government bonds. Due to this, large outflow of capital within a short period of time were expected. Now, although the high trade surplus within the country acted as a buffer against the large capital outflows, the trade surplus was slowly declining. This could lead to serious effects on the country's economy. Now passing on to Fung Jeung to present about the ways to overcome the macroeconomic problem.
My name is Fung Jeung, and I will be going through the methods of overcoming the macroeconomic problems that I identified just now. As mentioned earlier, the three macroeconomic problems are inflation, depreciating currency, and large capital outflow. These three problems are interrelated, so solving one of the problems would help solve the others. Firstly, there are two policies that could be used to overcome inflation. Both policies influence the economy by changing factors of the aggregate demand and supply. In short, the contractionary monetary policy changes the aggregate demand by influencing the money supply and interest rates, while contractionary fiscal policy changes the aggregate demand by using taxes and government spending. First of all, the monetary policy, unlike the fiscal policy, is implemented by the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia. It is used to reduce inflation that is caused by rising price levels. In order to reduce the aggregate demand, Bank Negara Malaysia would need to decrease investments to increase the interest rates by decreasing the money supply. So what are the three methods that could be used to decrease the money supply? Firstly, to increase the reserve ratio which the commercial banks are supposed to hold by increasing the reserve ratio, the commercial banks would have to keep more money as reserves, which results in a decrease in quantity of money. So there will be a decrease in loans, which then leads to a reduced money supply. Next, Bank Negara could also decrease the money supply by charging a higher discount rate towards the commercial banks. This increases the prices of borrowing from other banks, which discourages banks to loan out money, thus contracting the money supply in the system. Lastly, the most flexible and common method that is used to manipulate the money supply by the central banks is through open market operations, which includes the buying or selling of government bonds. To reduce the money supply in this case, Bank Negara would need to sell bonds to banks. This would mean Bank Negara Malaysia would take out money from banks and keep it as reserves, therefore lesser quantity of money in the economy. Now I'll be explaining how the money supply and fiscal policy is used to shift the aggregate demand graph. Firstly, we need to understand the aggregate demand and supply graphs. The aggregate demand graph with the formula consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports is used to display the relationship between the real GDP, the output, and the price level of the economy. The aggregate supply graph, on the other hand, shows the production of goods and services firms are inclined to sell at a certain price level. The intersection of the two graphs would show the equilibrium price level and the equilibrium output of goods and services in the economy. So how does the monetary policy change the aggregate demand and supply graph? The central bank would reduce the money supply with the methods I've mentioned earlier. This causes the interest rates to rise, causing a decrease in investments and consumer spendings. This causes two values of the aggregate demand to decrease in value, which ultimately results in the decrease in the equilibrium price level. The fiscal policy, on the other hand, is implemented by the government. The fiscal policy has a more direct effect on the aggregate demand, as government expenditure is a part of the formula. One way to reduce the demand is to simply reduce the government spending, therefore shifting the aggregate demand to the left. The second way to reduce aggregate demand is through increasing taxes, as it reduces the disposable income of consumers, then reduces their purchasing power, so consumer spendings would decrease, shifting the aggregate demand to the left, lowering the equilibrium price level. Now I will be talking about increasing the value of Malaysian currency. One way that the currency would be appreciated is when there is less inflation in the economy. So by lowering the inflation with policies mentioned earlier, the Malaysian exports would decrease in price, which becomes relatively cheaper than other countries and becomes more attractive towards foreign buyers and demand rises. It also decreases the money supply, so interest rates would be increased, leading to the increased foreign investments and increases the demand for currency, so the ringgit will appreciate. The rising crude oil prices would increase the country's revenue. Being one of the major oil exporters in Southeast Asia, increasing crude oil prices would increase revenues and reinvestments due to higher export costs, which would lead to appreciation of the Malaysian ringgit. In other words, the prices of exports increase, causing a higher demand on Malaysian ringgit, thus leads to a rising of currency. Lastly, selling foreign currencies would decrease the money supply of Malaysian ringgit in the market, so there will be relatively less ringgit in the economy when compared to other foreign currencies, so the demand for ringgit will increase. When foreign currencies are sold by Bank Negara Malaysia, it will cause appreciation of the Malaysian ringgit, so the capital outflow will also be reduced due to more investments flowing into the country. Lastly, the monetary policy could reduce the capital outflows by increasing the interest rates, as higher real rates of return will attract domestic and capital assets towards foreign investors. This decreases the capital outflow as money is flowing in the economy, which will also cause more appreciation of the ringgit. Now I will be passing on to Ian, which will conclude this presentation.
Be talking about the conclusion. So what did we learn in this article? First, we have inflation, exchange rate, and outflow of capital. And then we have impacts of whatever that's mentioned in this article, and then how to overcome it. For inflation rate increased from 2% to 5%. It led to the rise in cooking oil. In 1 kg of poly bag of cooking oil rose from 250 ringgit to 290 ringgit. And 5 kg bottled cooking oil rose from 13 ringgit and 35 cents to 15 ringgit and 25 cents. Next, we have exchange rate. How did the ringgit fluctuated in 2016? At the beginning of the year, it was 1 USD to 3 ringgit and 85 cents. And by the end of the year, it was 1 USD to 4 ringgit and 49 cents. This shows how much the ringgit has dropped. Next, we have outflow of capital. As you can see from the graph that was mentioned before, that it went from negative to positive and then from positive to negative again. Due to this graph, it shows that it is not stable. And then moving on to impacts. These are the three main problems, the impacts that has affected the economy. First, we have rise in prices for imports and exports. Second, we have decline of the ringgit. And third, we have large outflow of capital. So let's see how to overcome these issues. First, we have overcoming inflation. To overcome inflation, we have 3 ways of doing so. First, by raising reserve ratio for banks. And second, we can have the bank negara to give discounted rate for commercial banks. And third, we have buying or selling government bonds to increase our inflation rate. Another way would be aggregate demand and supply. And third would be increasing value of Malaysian currency. By lowering the inflation with policies, the Malaysian exports would decrease in price, which becomes relatively cheaper than other countries and become more attractive toward foreign buyers and demand rises. Another way would be selling foreign currency to decrease supply of Malaysian ringgit in the market from the Central Bank of Malaysia. As for the large capital outflow, Bank Negara could sell more foreign exchange to reduce depreciations as well. Thank you.